is that it is not a political problem. It's not a political thing at all, liberal, conservative, whatever. What I'm saying is that it is a people thing, rich versus poor. That's it.
Wow.
What's up, everybody? So my name is Michael Stevenson. Welcome back to my channel. Today, I want to talk about something that is, first off, sorry, as you can tell, I'm still very new at this, so I'm trying to get my footing. I wanted to say that this is part of the entertainment industry series that I'm doing on my channel, which I talk about the entertainment industry and some of the differences that I think are going on in the current realm of industry. I'm trying to do these videos sequentially so that some of the topics and some of the phrases that I use are covered in a kind of shorthand, so that in later videos, I don't have to spend nearly as much time actually explaining certain ideas and ideals. So if you haven't seen some of the other videos that I am talking about, specifically I'm going to be mentioning in this video generational cycle as it pertains to truth, reality, and beauty. I don't know if I've actually released that video yet or not, but just know that it sort of goes with this video. So you guys read the title. I'm sure some of you are probably thinking that it's inflammatory. Others of you are thinking that it's clickbait, or that it's going to be super ranty, or that it's going to be a ridiculous title, or that I'm not going to talk about that at all. But you are pretty much all wrong. I meant exactly what it is that I wrote in the title, and you will see and understand why, hopefully, at the end of this video. Yes, the economy that we have currently today is based on either one of two things. It is based on either the entertainment industry as a whole, how it moves, and or it is based on the slavery, specifically the kind and type of slavery that we saw in America and in the Atlantic slave trade in the 16, 17, and 1800s. Okay, so let me first say that it is actually very difficult to figure out where I want to start here, whether I want to start with slavery or whether I want to start with the art and entertainment industry as a whole. All of us, or at least most of us over a certain age, should have heard of this term before. And the term that I'm going to use is socioeconomics. Socioeconomics essentially is the realization that the social aspect of any society, of any civilization, directly impacts the economic side of that same society or civilization, and that one kind of can't exist without the other, at least not in a way that is conducive to success of the overall society. For a long time, I have known that the way that you can basically split socioeconomics in two, and the way that you can, I guess, in some ways predict what may happen next, is that you can look at the things that each one of those cycles, and yes, we have a social cycle as well as we have an economic cycle. So when you look at them and you separate socio and economic, you can see that each one has not only its own drivers, but its own sort of predictors. So from the social side, almost anything Black or African Americans specifically do, as well as anything that kind of impoverished people do, America follows that. And then to a greater extent, the world follows America on a social level in some ways. We're going to talk about that maybe in another video if we really get to it. But then on an economic level, like I said, and like the title of this video is, economics and our economy and the way in which we have careers, jobs, etc., that definitely inherently relates to either the art and entertainment industry or slavery, as it was in America. Now, you have to understand that I'm not going to do a deep dive into American slavery here. That is not what I'm here for. But I am saying that if you go back and you look at history, American slavery and the slavery of the Atlantic slave trade, when slaves were moving to the Americas, that kind of slavery was oftentimes vastly different from some of the slavery that we've had in history before. And so I feel like I have to mention that because, again, some of the slavery that we have in history before, what you will find is that everybody says that they've had slaves before, but the slavery that we had then was vastly different. And now that we have the system in place that we have, our new system sort of feeds on not the oldest system, but the American slavery system. So let's actually start first with art and entertainment, though, because I want to jump back and forth between the two. So for a little history of art and entertainers, specifically as it relates to actors, actresses, directors, producers, writers, etc. So you have to understand that, number one, the idea of acting, of putting on a show that is based on either fictional events or is based on an exaggerated reality, is something that is actually, obviously it predates film and television, but it predates most of our current societies as they are constructed now and as we think of them now. It is going further back than just England and Shakespeare. It's going further back even than Jesus's days. I believe one of the earliest mentions that we have of and or about actors comes from one of the great thinkers like Aristotle or Plato or Socrates. One of them actually said that they hated actors because of the fact that actors and actresses, it is their job to lie all day. And of course, they, being some of the early great thinkers that we had, they prided themselves on their job being the seeking out of truth. When you consider that, you have to consider all the different changes that our economies have gone through throughout the years. What you'll find is that actors and actresses, they have always sort of remained pretty much the same, even though our economies have changed drastically. So let me first set up. Originally, there were what we call acting troupes way back in the day. And what an acting troupe was is that it consisted of a main actor or actress. Well, a main actor, a main actress. Different cultures had different things. Sometimes there were no actresses, there were no women. The female parts, if they even had any, were played by other men or younger boys. This was replicated again in, I believe, the English culture of the 1600s with Shakespeare. If you watch the movie Shakespeare in Love, that's kind of where you get that from, the fact that women weren't allowed to do theater. So what you did is that you had an actor, an actress sometimes, and then of course you had a lot of other actors and actresses that supported those actors. And then you also had a writer, and then you also had a sort of director, but they were really sort of organizers. They kind of held the job of both a director and producer, as well as like travel agent and other such things. All of these people came together to be in what they call a troupe, an acting troupe. What would generally happen is that these people would go out onto the road, and they would travel from city to city, from, hamlet to hamlet, performing various plays. Oftentimes the plays were things that they themselves wrote. Somebody within the troupe, within the company, and also could be called companies, tended to write what they were going to perform. This wasn't always the case. In some cases, they did get things from other writers or other troupes or just other places in general. What would tend to happen is that the troupe or the company would go into a new city, and they would perform maybe for a few days, and they would rack up however much money they can make in the city, and then they would pack up everything that they had. And in some cases, if we're talking a long time ago, the troupe would spend most of their time on the road, pretty much the entire year on the road. They would generally have someone working for them. Maybe they were a part of the troupe, but maybe not. Maybe they were a newer part of the troupe. Sometimes they were a younger part of the troupe. They would have this person, a look-ahead scout, if you will. That's not what they called it, but their job was to go ahead of the troupe, like maybe a day or so before the troupe got to the next city or town, check on a few things, see if that town, that next city was friendly enough, see if they had proper lodging, proper food, and see if people were actually interested enough. Not in every case were the cities conducive for the artists to even go and put on a show. Sometimes the cities just didn't even have the money to support the artists in any way, shape, or form. And then other times, they didn't have other things that they were struggling with. They might not have had good lodging or even a good place for the troupe to set up and have their own little encampment. There were a lot of things that early artists and entertainers had to deal with if they wanted to do their art. Unless they were super successful, they would need supplementary income. So some artists and entertainers would take on other jobs. Carpentry was a big one, farm hands for a day or a week or however long the company was in town. When they didn't have that system, they developed another system, which you probably are more familiar with, and that was the patron system. Patron system was basically a rich donor would come in and they would enjoy the art and the entertainment so much that they were willing to put up their own money in order to feed and to lodge the troupe, or at the very least, certain members of a troupe or a company. They would do that knowing that they really weren't most likely going to get their investment back. Making money within the art and entertainment industry, even back then, was incredibly difficult. Here is where I kind of stop stop and have to slow down and tell people some stuff that a lot of people, weirdly enough, they react to it in a very strange way. And I've said this before, one of the ways in which we teach art and entertainment incorrectly, in my opinion, in most schools, is that at some point along the line, the roles of the patron or the reasons behind why the patron did something and why the artist and entertainer did something kind of switched. It was always the patron's role or the patron's reason. His or her reasoning was always not about making money per se, but about getting that art and entertainment out there. Because most patrons were rich people, having a troupe of artists and entertainers performing not just for them whenever they wanted them to, but basically going around an entire countryside for a full year touring is similar to how rich people today have various toys and things that they like to use. The idea of the patron has morphed into what we now call the owner. It's basically the same thing of like, why own a basketball team or a football team or something like that? Do the owners buy it specifically to make a whole lot of money off of it? Weirdly enough, the answer is no. Yes, they can make a lot of money off those things, but you don't go out and buy a $2 billion basketball team solely because you want to make money. You buy it more than anything because, number one, if you have that amount of money, chances are that you can make another $2 billion. Not easily, but you could probably do it in half or even a quarter of the time that you made the first $2 billion. Money is a secondary thought in that process. Essentially, it's a big flex. You want to make sure that people know that you own this thing and you want to have special privileges that come from owning this thing. That was always what the patrons thought. The artists and entertainers, yes, while they were happy just to do what they wanted to do in life, it was never a thing of, oh, I would do this for free if I could. Like, no, they always wanted to make money. Yet somehow, in some way, our current modern day system, so many people get it in their minds, if you really love it, you would do it for free, especially when it comes to art and entertainment with acting and things of that nature. So we have this twisted idea that these artists, they don't go into doing their art in order to make money. Like, that's, I guess, like the last thing that should be on their mind. And strangely enough, successful artists and entertainers, they say the same thing. Don't enter into this industry to try to make money. And don't get me wrong, yes, there is obviously some truth there because they're trying to temper your expectations, but it also is a great deal of crap. Yes, you can enter this industry trying to say, well, I'm just doing it because I love it, but there's a certain level of love that meets a certain level of abuse and rejection that at some point they don't equal each other, or one stops being beneficial without the addition of some sort of monetary gain. It was always the patrons who did this, not for the money, not the artists and entertainers. The artists and entertainers wanted to get paid. Most of the artists and entertainers, unless they were incredibly successful, a lot of them did not own land. They didn't own property. If you own property of almost any kind, chances are high that it was a lot of land. Unless you actually lived directly in a big city, you usually had some sort of farm. Even if it wasn't like a full working farm, you generally just had a lot of land. It didn't make sense from that level that artists and entertainers would own land of almost any kind. But then on the other level, it also didn't make sense because, like I said, artists and entertainers, the troops, the companies were oftentimes gone so often during the year. It just didn't make sense for them to keep a place that they would ultimately have to pay some kind of tax or levy on, ultimately to whatever sort of king or monarchy or whatever sort of governmental body or agencies that they had within their country. It just kind of didn't make sense. So they lived in a somewhat nomadic way, to where they lived in a lot of lodges, a lot of hotels and inns, things of that nature. And then once they did get back to what they called their home base, once they got back to their city, in general, that was when the patron stepped in, and the patron would usually own a piece of property that the whole troop could use as their sort of home base when they were there. But again, they were expected to be gone for most of the year anyway. So like I said, it just never made sense for them to own a land property. Of course, they owned like other stuff that they could carry with them, things that they could make into costumes, things of that nature. So speaking of making and creating things, obviously it was expected for the artists and the entertainers to not just be savvy with their specific art, whether it was, acting or directing or writing, but they also had to be multi-talented in that they had to be able to usually make their own clothes, do their own sort of makeup, do like a lot of different things. They had to be Renaissance men before the Renaissance even was a thing. And so because of this whole Renaissance thing, they also had to be incredibly smart as well. And they had to be mentally flexible. You have to remember that the common man and woman reading is actually a very new thing. It's only really been like 400 or 500 years since reading became a thing that everybody did, or that at least a high percentage of regular people outside of the aristocracy did. There were a lot of people who were, well, not a lot, but there were quite a few people who came from aristocratic backgrounds that decided to become actors and actresses as well. But then also, they also got a high level of runaways, people who basically had run away or fled from their family in order to pursue acting. Because they were on the road 24/7, nearly 300 plus days of the year, that made it very difficult to fall in love. Even though, you know, love is not really, that wasn't really what people were going for back in the days. It made it hard for you to, I guess, meet someone. Let's say even if you were a man, even if you were a man and you were able to meet someone in a new town or city, you couldn't really do anything with that. You most likely had little to no money unless you were an incredibly successful actor, which meant that you also had little to no property, which of course then meant that you couldn't pay any sort of dowry. Also, you would have to convince both her and him, and generally her father or her parents in general, that the lifestyle was conducive to that person being well taken care of, that woman being well taken care of, which is incredibly hard. So what you did most likely is that you got people who wanted to, either they did fall in love, but one of the people had to run away, or you just got some people who just got up one day and said that they didn't want to live the kind of life that they were living at the time. And so they just sort of left. they basically left and went to another city to try to make something of themselves. Because there was not a lot of meeting outside of the troupe or of the company, what you got was, most of the time, you married inside of the company. Then on top of that, once you were married, obviously you would have children. It's not like you sent those children away, although there were a lot of people who sent their children away to like convents, religious places, things of that nature. But for the most part, most people kept their kids. They held on to their kids, which is how nepotism became a huge thing. Now, mind you, as I've covered in my Nepo Baby video, or my legacy video, I like to call them legacies rather than Nepo babies, it was just sort of a thing for everybody to pass on whatever they did and whatever skills they had to their children. Actors and actresses and the people within the company, they were no different. They would have children out on the road, and those children would not only weave into the different stories that they were telling, newborn babies became new babies in the plays that they were putting on. As those children grew up, they took on other roles. They would sometimes go around the crowd to collect money, all sorts of things. So then we jump forward some years. We finally get to the age of the camera, film, and then later TV. The acting troupe is, in a sense, kind of gone, but there's still a lot of other things that hold in place. Number one, there's still a lot of traveling that is inherent in acting, because now there's studios that essentially make contracts or patron-like contracts with the artists that they have. They want to shoot some stuff on location. They have their own studios where they feel like they can shoot a lot of stuff. And there's two big cities, LA and New York. They sort of trade talent back and forth. So you still get quite a bit of traveling, but not nearly as much. But as the ages, as the eras change in Hollywood, you start to get more and more on location shooting outside of a studio. The traveling comes back for the artists in a big way. Also, film and television ushers in is that they usher in the idea of the seasonal projects. So the old troops and companies of yesterday, generally what they would do is that they would learn roughly about two or three different plays all at once, just so that if they went to a city and that city had maybe just had an acting troupe come through 3 months prior and they didn't have a contract with that city, which that was also a thing. Sometimes you could actually create contracts with these different cities to where you would be the only touring company to come through that city and put on these shows and things of that nature. If they didn't have a contract with that city, then they didn't know what the show was that was being put on by this other company. So they would have to do another show. But in general, they didn't change those 3 shows until the next year. With film and with television, what it became is that you had a project that you worked on for roughly a month, 2 months, 3 months, however many months that you needed to be on that. You had maybe a break of a week, 2 weeks. It depended on the timing of other projects. And then you start a completely different project with a completely different team, and you would be working on that thing for however long you were needed. Because there weren't any troops anymore, the hustle or the grind of making sure that you always had a job, a profitable job for you, became a huge thing. Back in the day, the companies had to hustle too. Yes, they could make contracts with different cities and things, but they still had to hustle in order to get the money, because most companies did not necessarily want to be indebted to their patrons. Even though they knew that the patrons were not really in it to make money, they didn't want to be indebted to them for very long, because then that meant that the patrons could control what it was that they were putting out. They had to hustle and make sure that the cities were, as I said with the scouts, make sure that the cities were really going to pay them, etc., etc. And so then you finally get to, I guess, this current era. So what you start to see in this current era is that it becomes an even greater divide between the haves and the have-nots. The people who are at the top, who are the really famous actors and actresses, or writers or directors, what have you, they make a ton of money, globs and globs and globs, millions and millions of dollars. Almost everybody else who fills in the rest of the movie or the TV show, they don't make nearly as much money. But in a weird way, the public, or the people who both are paying them as well as the people who are going to see the films and see the TV shows, they have this weird feeling that if you're on screen, if you are appearing on screen, then basically not only are you famous, but clearly you must be rich. You must be making a lot of money because you're on this particular TV show and that's a hit, or you're in this particular film and that's a hit, etc., etc. So there becomes this huge divide between what people think and what reality is. Okay, so I'm trying to think of anything else that I want to mention in this video specifically. I had something about like subscriptions and subscription services, but I think I actually want to save that for a different video. We now double back and we start looking at some of the things that came specifically from the acting troupe company and how that has developed with us. Art and entertainment are basically the original gig economy. An actor or an actress can easily be working on one project for the unreal amount of time. For instance, Zendaya, there were a lot of people who saw the film Dune in 2021, and one of the things that they mentioned is that, they sold this movie on Zendaya being in it, and a lot of people were shocked that she wasn't in it nearly as much. She's really in it for like 4 minutes, and I knew that she wasn't going to be in it because I had actually read an article about Dune in which she mentioned how she literally only filmed for about 4 days. In the entertainment industry, it has always essentially been a gig economy because, number one, you have to book your next job, and then that job only lasts for a certain amount of time, similarly to how a gig economy is right now. You can have a gig and it can last for a week. It could be one specific project that they want you on that it lasts for however long it lasts. It doesn't matter so long as the company, the employer, can essentially keep you off of the books as their permanent employee. So you work on a particular task or a particular project. Then, of course, you have the hustle economy. And I know that some people might be thinking this, that, well, the way in which you describe the art and entertainers economy sounds sort of like a building contractor, right? People who build stuff. Even back in the day, their economy was kind of different, mainly because unlike artists and entertainers, builders were not expected to have secondary and tertiary other skills. If you were a mason, then you kind of trained to be a mason, and that's pretty much it. That's what you were. And so there was a mason job always waiting for you, especially if you were able to get into aristocracy's masonry club or something, like where you built specifically for the royals. Actors, entertainers, we were always expected to have multiple talents that kind of had nothing to do with acting or writing or directing. Today, in not only the hustle culture, but the gig economy, I know that it feels very much so like you are expected to have multiple different talents that seem to have nothing to do with each other, just so that you can have maybe a second or third job that you can then utilize to make money on. Everybody seems to expect for people to now have 2 or 3 money streams because there was always a patron on the artists and entertainers' back, but then also because of the fact that they had to stay out on the road for so long, and then going into the film and television, you were under contract by the studios in general. When this first started, there was a certain level of hustle culture built up within the spirit of the actors and actresses. It wasn't just that you wanted to work, but it was that you needed to be working, and you needed to be working hard basically all the time. A studio was not going to pay you to sit around on your butt all day for months and months on end without being able to utilize you. So you had to be out there constantly working, doing exactly what they tell you. And of course, that plays in slave culture too, and we will get to that in a second. Then you had the idea of ownership. So like I said, back in the day, most artists did not actually own physical land. What they owned were things that they kind of cobbled together. Some things were given to them by audience people who couldn't actually pay them in real monetary value. So they would give them something else of value. They would give those things to you, but you didn't really own a whole lot of stuff, and you especially didn't own a whole lot of fancy stuff. Nowadays, when you look around, we have a huge part of our economy now is based on the idea that you no longer own things. Like you no longer have to own things. So you don't have to own a car because there's Uber, and there's essentially always somebody Ubering around who does own a car, or even they don't have to own that car so much as they can lease that car and drive Uber. Generally don't own any pieces of entertainment anymore. Like most people don't buy DVDs or they don't buy DVDs. Most of them don't even buy like the digital copies of the TV shows and films that they like. So then of course you jump to the an idea which is sort of on the social side, where it's harder to meet people outside of work. And this especially goes for if you're not going into work, it's incredibly difficult to meet anybody of any real substance outside of work. Just like artists and entertainers had for years, the majority of them marry other people within the industry, and they still do and they still will, because it's so difficult to find not only a connection with somebody outside of the industry, but also to have them understand why it is that you do what you do, why you are in the industry, and how that affects you, how that affects your work environment, your work ethic, etc., etc. So then you have this idea of doing your work or working a job or being in a career, not because you want to get paid, especially not because you want to get paid a lot of money or make at least enough money to live off of, but mostly because you love it, because you just love your job. It feels very much so like employers they may offer other extraneous benefits, like, you know, a pool table in the break room or really nice buffet lunch bar, a whole bunch of other perks of the job. But the one thing that they don't offer you is more money, because they feel like, well, they want to make you fall in love with work as opposed to giving you enough money to sustain yourself or to do things that take you away from work. So as an artist and entertainer, you were expected to do this job, not really because you want money, because you want to get paid or anything, but you know, they'll pay you in exposure, or you do this job just because you love it and because you like it and because you know how lucky you are. It's like, well, technically everybody is lucky to have and to get a job and to hold on to that job. There's a bit of luck in all of that for all of us. And then you finally have some other extraneous things within the art and entertainment industry. Like for instance, another thing is the discrepancy or the big divide between the general artist and entertainer versus the top star. We have seen in the last 30, 40 years, we have seen the wealth gap between the top tier supposedly workers or employers or executives or what have you, and the lower and middle management sort of people. The people at the top are just making so much more than the people at the bottom that it seems almost laughable to think that they do the same job. You could have virtually the same job as what your boss has, and yet for some reason your boss could be making 10 or 15 or 100 times more than you, even though it doesn't look like they do much of anything more than what your responsibilities are. And then on top of that, they come in and they take credit for for some of the work that you yourself have done. Same thing in the actual entertainment industry. Again, yes, the stars, the movies have in the past relied heavily on the stars, but there's so many other people who helped to make the movie actually go, including other stars that are little, and they play these smaller roles, but they don't get paid in nearly the same kind of guap that the big stars get paid in. So there are a few other things. You can leave some ideas in the comments about what you think, but like what the similarities between the art entertainment industry are and the current economy. I just wanted to touch on slavery a little bit. I don't want to. I'm trying not to be political and go super deep into this, at least not right now on this channel. So what I would say is that obviously the first thing about slavery is that the owners and the presidents and the CEOs of these current companies, they do not care about you in almost any way, shape, or form. You are not a valuable member, not really a valuable member or part of their family. You are a cog, you are a piece in a machine that is there solely to make them a crap ton of money. They don't care about your health. If they didn't have to pay for your health care, they wouldn't. In the same way that American slave owners, don't get me wrong, there were some of them who were like, we have to medically take care of our slaves in order to get the highest amount of production out of them. But there were a lot who were like, why do we have to take care of all of them? Because they aren't producing quite as well. Current employers love pitting employees against each other constantly. And of course, this also goes on in the entertainment industry as well, very heavily. But employers will pit one employee against another, do some talking behind the back, some weird psychology to try to, I guess, get more out of the employee. It's a very underhanded tactic. Then, of course, you have employers who are paying anything but a living wage. Frankly, there are a lot of employers who not only not pay you what you are worth, but if they could get away with it, they would pay you nothing and work you to the bone, work you until you die. Of course, is exactly right in line with slavery. They don't particularly care about you having any kind of a private life at all. So they will work you incredibly long hours from dusk till dawn, or from dawn to dusk, and then require more of you off the clock, so to speak, in a similar way to what slavery is, to what slavery was, is that they worked as soon as the sun came up, sometimes even earlier than that, and they worked all the way until nighttime. There were no 8-hour shifts or anything like that. They worked until they dropped or until they went in. There's weirdly enough a push, at least in the Western world, for everybody to, well, not everybody, for certain people, let's say, to have more children, which very much so seems almost exactly like some of the slave breeding programs that America had. For those of you who don't know, in the early 1800s, the Atlantic slave trade was sort of outlawed, and the U.S. said that they were no longer going to import slaves. That just meant that they were going to now breed slaves. The percentage of slaves increased like fourfold in the course of the little 60 years between the start of 1800 and the Civil War. The food that they feed you is very much so similar to a slave-like food. Slaves were oftentimes given very little food. They had to make it last sometimes for the entire week. It was not nutritious, and it still is thought of to be not nutritious. They were the meats of animals, like the parts of animals that nobody else wanted to eat, whether it was head meat or the intestines or whatever. They oftentimes supplied you with vegetables that were the worst of the crop and things that, again, they just did not want to consume. Today, when you look at our economy, or you look specifically at the food that is on the shelves, it's there not to actually provide you any sort of real nutritional value or sustenance. It's simply there to fill your stomach up for a while, which ultimately gives you health problems years down the line. A lot of employers simply don't want you to have actual safety nets, things like Social Security, Medicare or Medicaid for all. They don't want these things because if you have a certain level or certain amount of debt, you are going to continue working for a longer period of time. Everything is overly expensive for kind of no reason. And then, of course, there's this insistence that a lot of current day employers have, and this is both for slavery as well as for the hustle culture of the entertainers. There's this insistence that essentially no matter how hard you work, you still, you kind of still aren't working hard enough. Like, you're not being productive enough. You need to work even harder because that's the only way that you're going to get to actually get ahead. And thusly, that's the only way that they're going to notice and acknowledge you, is if you work even harder than what you think is your 150% even. No one understand that there's still plenty of things that I actually didn't get to in this video. I was going to talk about the prevalence of ghost companies or zombie companies rather, and how they relate to all of the different production companies that we have in the entertainment industry. But I'm going to close out. If you're working in this economy right now, even though employees do have a certain level of power because there seem to be so many jobs out there that need to be filled, you are, for better or for worse, most likely stuck in one of those two paradigms. You are either in a place in which you are being treated somewhat like an artist slash entertainer. You're living that sort of life to where, again, you hop from gig to gig and some other things that you might not prefer. Or you are in some ways being treated like a modern slave, in which you are working yourself half to death, and you're not really getting anywhere, and you're making so much value for the company, but they will not actually fully acknowledge your value, and all they see you as is a number on the payroll. So I think that's it for right now. Hey, everybody. So while I don't have an official sign off yet, I guess I should do the whole please like, comment, share, and if you so desire and you want to see more, subscribe. But more importantly, I will ask that you please go and purchase one of my books. They are mostly ebooks, and pretty much they are all under $10. See if any of my work is actually any good, if it lives up to any of the things that I'm talking about here on my channel, specifically with the entertainment industry videos. So please go purchase my books. All of my links are down below. Thank you.